Welcome back to another podcast here in the Ram's Den. Today I'm joined by Johnny. I'm going to call you JonnyHodl because that's your Twitter tag. But what is your
Sure,
actual?
Johnny
What
Huddle's
is your
fine.
actual surname? I couldn't find it.
Yeah, I don't use
Unless
my
you don't want it.
surname though.
Okay.
So yeah, I just go with Johnny and Johnny Hodl. I'm probably
Okay.
gonna at some point decide on one as a pseudonym, but for now I'm trying to keep myself somewhat private.
Fair play. Fair play. I appreciate that. Well, welcome, mate. It's great to have you here. Some of my subscribers are going to know who you are because they watched your debate with Lauren Southern, and yeah, that must have been a bit intense. 700,000 subs, mostly anti-vegan, and you took her on in a debate on her channel. So how was that, mate?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of came like relatively last minute. She said to me kind of the day before, oh, I might want to do like a video with you. Didn't know what that was going to be about. And then kind of on the day, she was like, oh, I want to do a video about veganism. And I was like, okay. And like, I kind of knew what I was getting into. Like I knew I was going into the lion's den basically. And, I knew that I was going to, I knew that I was going to get kind of a lot of kickback on her channel for that. Like I knew that a lot of people were going to be kind of like pretty negative about it. I didn't expect too much, but I guess going into it, my thought was, the most important thing I wanted to do is kind of represent the vegan community as not being super kind of dogmatic and like hateful and, really triggered and stuff, because that's the stuff that this community is seeing. I'm a part of that kind of like right-wing community, and I see a lot of the videos and stuff and what people share. And most of it is vegans kind of going crazy, like screaming at people and like on the streets or whatever and getting triggered. Right. And I just thought like, one of the main things I want to do is go there and just be like a normal person and someone who kind of contradicts what a lot of these people actually think about vegans. So that was like one of my main intentions going in. And like props to you on your breakdown video. I thought you did an excellent job of kind of going through it all. I agree with most of what you said, and I think you had some really valid criticisms and stuff in there as well. And just your general video, your kind of approach to it, I think was right. And so I think you did a really good job. So thanks for doing that. You kind of like saved me a job of going back and maybe I was maybe feeling a bit more negative before I saw that, but after seeing that, I was like, yeah, I think that was it was about right. It was good balance.
I think, mate, the feedback from everyone who watched the video with me, at least, was overwhelmingly positive. Like, people were very impressed with how you handled yourself in the face of, let's be honest, Lauren didn't seem like she did 1 second of research before that conversation. If she had have done, she would have known not to go down the tried and true paths that most anti-vegans go down, and she would have gone for something a bit more spicy, maybe, or at least a bit more kind of intelligent. I don't mean that as an insult. I just mean literally, it seems like she didn't think about this at all, and it was a shame, really, because it could have been a more, I don't know. It seemed like it was kind of child's play for you, really, is what I'm trying to say. Like the most standard stuff you've ever heard was coming out mostly through the thing, right?
Yeah, definitely. Like the first half of it was kind of a breeze, but I feel like in the second half, I do feel like, like you said in your commentary, she kind of abandoned the points where I came up with like a really easy and succinct answer for, which is fine, because actually I'm okay with it moving into different territory. And I thought really in the end, there was a couple of interesting points were raised, which is, I know that a lot of people in the vegan community, they think that it's an elementary argument, the whole kind of like, oh, we're part of nature and therefore it's, I actually think that that's probably one of the more interesting areas for discussion in the whole vegan debate is the concept of, are we part of nature? Should we be subject to different rules of morality than the rest of the natural kingdom, basically? I actually think that's an interesting philosophical debate. Like, so I'm okay with it going there. And I thought that was a bit more of an intelligent point, even though some people don't necessarily phrase it intelligently. And then I think that the point as well about, there was one other one. There was, and then obviously the pro-life thing, which I know there was a bit of kind of, I know that's a controversial issue as well, but I do think that is another interesting and kind of intellectual area of debate. So where it ended up was more intellectual, I think, but obviously the first half, it was pretty plain.
Yeah, it got there. And yeah, fair play to Lauren. I did say that, I think, in my reaction a few times, that like, fair play for listening here and actually coming up with some kind of intelligent point. So credit where credit's due. Just, I felt that the bulk of it was kind of the silly anti-vegan nonsense, but yeah, like I agree with you, towards the end it definitely did get a little bit more. And also, again, credit where credit's due. I don't know if Lauren saw that video, if you're still, or she knows you're coming here today or whatever, but if she has ended up watching this, I'll say what I said there again, that there is some respect there, that she actually allowed you to come on and talk. Like, she actually didn't interrupt you like at all. Was super reasonable with you, treated you like a mate, which actually it seems like you are mates. And
Yeah.
allowed you to have a platform on a channel where, 700,000 people, that's a big platform. So again, credit where credit's due for not being really unreasonable, not being a Piers Morgan, right? And being a
Yeah.
total jerk, because let's be honest, her subs would have fucking loved that. If she was just an asshole to you from start to finish, they would have loved it. She would have gained loads
Yeah.
of support, but she didn't appeal to them. She decided to actually give you the time, which I think is respectable, right?
Yeah, yeah. And as you say, there is, it's kind of a difficult dynamic because obviously, we're working together, we're friends and all the rest of it. So, but at the same time, her audience, they're looking for like, Lauren Southern Rex vegan or whatever it is.
Yeah, of course.
So we kind of, she said to me before, we want to keep it light. It's not going to be like, it's going to be kind of like a somewhat light of a lighter conversation, and something like that has a bit like funny bits in there as well. So there was a bit of teasing and that kind of thing in there, which was fine. And at the end of the day, my job wasn't to go in there and to kind of get triggered by like little points that were made, or like his disorder or whatever. My job was to be like, no, like vegans are not all this type of people who just get triggered at everything. We can take a joke, we can, all the rest of it. So yeah, totally. It was an interesting dynamic because obviously, I normally with these conversations, I like to kind of really get down to people's kind of raw like emotion and just say, look, would you kill your dog? You have empathy for your dog, you have empathy for your cat or whatever. Why do you not have the same empathy for an animal that you're eating needlessly, etc.? I like to go there, but it didn't feel like the right conversation to go there. We were trying to keep it as a light conversation. So I guess my approach changed, and the desired outcomes were different.
Yeah, and I think also that I know vegans are often criticized for going straight to the dog arguments as well. So you would have, that's right. Most likely what people would have been saying, like, oh, here we go again with the dogs. So actually you probably did that was probably the right move to not go down that road and actually give something a bit fresh, a bit different for people who've seen a lot of vegan arguments. So I think that was a good decision, to be honest. And the jokes and stuff and the quips, I think, again, yeah, you did a great job with that. And you can't, it is okay to laugh at these silly quips. Even Piers Morgan got a laugh out of me when he was saying, the vegans are hangry or whatever. And it's funny because the way he positioned it, it was actually right in the beginning of his segment. Hangry vegans have been hitting the streets. And it was like, that's actually pretty funny because it's a subtle one. If you blink, you'll miss it. So I appreciate it sometimes when there's a funny little dig like that. That's pretty funny. I'll take it, even though he's total, so yeah, again, I totally agree with what you did there. I think it was great. Was she nervous at all, by the way, about this, or was she just like fully just ready to get in there and do it?
fully ready. Yeah, like she was just like straight into it. There was no planning. I don't think there was any preparation. Well, there wasn't any preparation on my side for sure. I don't think there was any on her side either. It was literally just like, let's get the cameras on, we'll have a conversation, we'll make something for the channel. And yeah, like you said, I do think that she deserves a lot of credit for doing that, because most people, they won't even have that conversation, or if they do, they're going to have some kind of trap set or whatever. They're going to, it was none of that. It was genuinely like a conversation that in the end we disagreed. I feel like I was given the opportunity to put my arguments forward. Some I did a better job than others, but yeah, I think it was overall like a positive thing.
Yeah. And she didn't whip out a Big Mac in the end to try and try to piss you off, which she could have done. It could have been done, and you probably would have had to laugh it off just to say, to not to do what you wanted to do, like not give that impression of. But that would have been a real shitty move. But yeah, she didn't do it. It's respect, and it's weird that we have to say, isn't it weird that we have to say like, she deserves respect for being respectful, because in today's world, so many people aren't. That's kind of messed up, isn't it? Really, she gave you the basic level of respect, and we're both having to say like, oh, that's really good, because your peers is out there, and loads of other hosts just don't these days. They offer no respect to a vegan on the show nowadays. So
and I think that we've got to remember like where, I mean, I don't know too much about you, David. Like, so I don't know like how long you've been vegan and stuff. But like for me, I've been vegan. I'm sure we'll get into this, but like I've been vegan, over 7 years, and I've realized that actually most of the time, the things that wins people over is not, like a gotcha argument or anything like that. The thing that wins people over is showing that you can be, healthy, you can be happy, you can be, strong, you can be whatever, like all of these positive things, and you can be vegan at the same time, and that none of those things are in contradiction with each other. So I really think that like the key to winning this whole thing, obviously there's a place for all that, and I have huge respect for people who just go in and go out on the streets and debate and all the rest of it. There's a place for that because it's important. But for me personally, that's not necessarily my mission. My mission is just like, okay, be a good example of a vegan, and like allow other people to see that and go, oh, that's interesting. This person isn't killing any animals, and they're still able to be, healthy. They're still able to be happy, etc. So like, that was kind of, that's always at the back of my mind when I'm having these conversations.
Sure. And did you find that? Did you find any success after this conversation? Like, have you been digging into the comments and seeing if there was anyone that was swayed by you?
Yeah, well, I actually I didn't look at the comments until before this conversation because I thought
Okay.
you might ask me about the comments. So I hadn't looked at it at all. The main reason is because I find it difficult to not kind of like get pulled in and start like
Yeah.
commenting back and be like, oh yeah, but you're wrong about this or think about that. So I was like, if I leave it 2 weeks, then the ship has sailed, right? So like
Mhm.
I feel like the ship has kind of sailed now on me responding. So now I can look at them a bit more objectively and not get sucked in. And to be honest, like some of the comments were good. I don't know whether people had come from vegan channels to come and comment on it, or whether it was people who were on Lauren's channel who were, just lurking vegans who were on her channel already. There was some good ones there. Most of them were saying, at least it was a positive conversation. It was, it's nice to not get into an argument and stuff. The ones that were negative, I mean, it was all just like, like man bun vegan, so obvious, all this kind of stuff. And it's just like, I don't know. I kind of think of that speaks volumes in a way because it's like, look, bring an argument up, like go into something in the conversation and where I've tripped up. And there was a couple of times when I tripped up, so I don't think it was that hard to find them. You highlighted a couple of areas where I didn't do so well. There's a couple of points that I'm, not so kind of keen on after the fact, but like at least use something from the argument, right? But like most of the comments that are negative, it's just, oh, typical vegan with the man bun. Oh, it's just like, I don't know. Think a bit more, like go a bit deeper. Like this is an opportunity. I think like the problem is with a lot of people is that they're not willing to face they're not willing to kind of like go into their philosophy and say, maybe I've been living in a way that's in contradiction to, what should be my morality, right? And so they skip everything. They just like gloss over all of the arguments. They look for one thing like vegan, man bun, and then they go, I'm going to hone in on that and basically say this guy's the typical vegan, rather than saying, what's he saying? What's the substance of his argument,
Oh yeah, totally. And you know for a fact that they've got faceless profile pics when they're insulting your appearance. They never actually show their own faces. Like this is something I've learned from. I've been doing vegan YouTube for like 3 years, probably like 2 years solid, like actually doing it in a year on and off. And I've actually been vegan for about 13 years, by the way, and vegetarian since birth. So like I know exactly what you're on about when what you were saying before, for sure. I've been through as much of this as you have and come out the same end. I'm fully with you on what you were saying before. And what you were saying just now reminded me of, I had a debate with a famous YouTuber called Jadion. I don't know if you know this guy. He's like a prank YouTubing guy. And
No.
back then he had less than 1 million subs. Now he's on like 5 million. The guy's just like blown up. It's crazy.
Oh, wow.
But he did a prank where he ate meat in a vegan restaurant, and real meat actually, for a prank. And I made a video just fucking destroying him, just being I was just roasting him, and I was hoping that to get his fans angry, and it worked. And then the video blew up because of that. That's kind of one of my tactics, really. I'm not very reasonable in those videos, because the less reasonable I am, the more they'll share it, right? This kind of how it goes. Okay. And then it opens other doors. This guy, Instagram calls me. He's like, I want to have a chat with you. And I've invited him for a debate. We had a full debate. He pranked me in the debate. He cooked meat in front of me during the debate, convinced me it was real meat, and then revealed to me it was impossible. So he got me live. And then anyway, the point is, the comments of that live debate that we had, which was pretty intense actually, was pretty much the same thing. It was just people saying I lost, right? You lost, you're shit, stupid vegan. But then, actually, there were a hell of a lot of his fans that were criticizing him, believe it or not. So the ones who were criticizing me had nothing really good to say, but the ones criticizing him were actually saying, hey, your arguments weren't as good. And then the vegan had it was a reasonable conversation, had it better. So it's kind of a similar thing. It always tends to be the ones that are criticizing, like you said, they're just glossing over the points, and it's a knee-jerk reaction more than anything. It's just like, you're wrong. Why? I don't know. So very, very similar vibes to that one. And that debate got over they got over 1 million views, which is just insane, right?
That's
what's
amazing.
The one with Lauren on right now? I didn't check. I didn't go back to it. Last time it was on 300,000 or something. That's fucking awesome.
Oh,
dude.
Was it? It was.
Oh yeah,
I had no idea it was that many. I had no idea. I only looked. I only looked one day after, and I think it had about 30,000 or something. But
really, why did I think it was like 300? Oh, my bad. Why did I say 300,000? Maybe okay, take a zero off. Yeah, 50,000. My bad. 50,000, right, okay. 50K. Yeah. I think YouTube fucking limits her, doesn't it? I think it's I think
Probably, yeah, probably.
I think it.
She's a kind of controversial figure or whatever. So,
I mean, okay, not even. It's not a question. It is 100% limiting her because with
ah,
700K subs, there's no way in hell that Lauren Southern versus a vegan doesn't get more than 50K. That's bullshit. YouTubers putting a limit on it.
yeah.
But anyway, that's a whole other debate. And I know from listening to a couple of your podcasts that I guess that's something you're also into. But let's try and stick that. We could go on. We could do like a 5-hour conversation. I think unless we stick to what we came here to talk about. But let's talk about something that is alongside that,
Mhm.
actually, alongside today's topics, because in your debate with Lauren, one of the things you said that stuck out when she asked you why you're vegan was like the first thing she asked you, basically, and you said it's because it's your libertarian values. I have never heard anyone in my entire life, and I've been vegan 13 years, say that ever. And I've asked so many people, mate, like, oh, when did you go vegan? Why did you go? I've never heard anyone say that ever. So that was, to me, was like, oh my god, I need to know what the fuck that means, because you actually explained this non-violence principle, but I don't understand anything about libertarianism. So can you explain exactly what that means? Like, what is libertarianism and how does it relate to veganism in your world? Yeah.
Yeah, so just to kind of clarify that, like when I first went vegan, I wasn't libertarian. I didn't like necessarily frame it in that way. I didn't have it wasn't
Okay.
like I was like, oh, I'm libertarian. I agree with the non-aggression principle, and therefore it was more that I started like I wanted to obviously like reduce the suffering to animals, obviously we're causing unnecessarily. And as I went down that path, I was kind of simultaneously going along the libertarian path at the same time, and I was learning about the ideas such as the non-aggression principle. And in the
Mhm.
end, what I kind of like realized is that these two ideas are so similar. Like for me, the non-aggression principle, like just the general concept that you don't kind of take from someone, you don't steal from someone, you don't commit harm upon someone, that everyone's entitled to the sovereignty of their own property and their own body, like the body being the kind of the main or the most fundamental property.
Mhm.
Once I realized that, that and veganism is so similar, because, veganism is just affording that exact same framework to animals. So,
Mhm.
like, I guess it's just that, there was these two paths that were happening for me simultaneously, learning about libertarianism, learning about veganism. And then I realized that there is this branch that goes between them, which is essentially the non-aggression principle. The only
Mhm.
difference is that most libertarians will not extend that to animals. They basically say the non-aggression principle is, for the humankind, and
Right.
it doesn't extend to animals. And I look at veganism and I say it's basically the exact same thing. It's just extended to animals, right? Because a vegan is not going to
Okay.
say, if you're attacked by a crocodile, you don't kill the crocodile, right? A
Right.
vegan is going
Right.
to accept that you are still able to defend yourself. Now that's very similar to the non-aggression principle. If someone is attacking you,
Hmm.
then you are within that framework, completely justified in defending yourself. So I basically see them as very, very similar. I mean, I can't
Hmm.
really see, other than saying, obviously, one's for humans, one's for animals, which, as we know in the vegan community, like that's just not an argument. You have to
Mhm.
actually come up with some differentiating factor for it not to
Mhm.
apply. I look at the non-aggression principle and I'm like, why can't we extend that to non-human animals? So
Right.
when I'm talking to people who are more like right leaning, I normally approach it from that angle, but it's not like that from day one. I was like, non-aggression, I'll stop killing animals. It's more
Mhm.
that has become kind of like an umbrella philosophy for me in both areas.
So libertarianism, is that, so that non-aggression principle, is that the core? Is that where it's all kind of centered around that, or is that one element of what it means
It's
to be a
one of, yeah,
libertarian?
it's one of, but
Okay.
like I think most people would say that it's like one of the core tenets is that fundamental idea.
Okay.
Libertarianism, it can kind of, there's lots of different words for it that can be kind of interchanged. If we're talking about kind of pure libertarianism, and one of the ones I've heard the word voluntarism. I'm not sure if you've heard that one. That's a very
No.
good word for talking about libertarianism as well. I don't
Okay.
personally use it because people tend to be a bit like, what's voluntarism? But it's essentially that all actions should be voluntary, right? So you cannot coerce someone, you cannot take someone's property. Property rights are central to libertarianism. So the idea is that your property and the property of your own person is kind of the highest. We should be kind of like, it should be protected to the highest
Okay.
degree, and that shouldn't be infringed upon by other people.
Okay.
Um, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought a little bit here.
It's all right. I mean,
What was the question?
these things seem pretty like everybody would agree. So like, why is everybody not a libertarian if that's because these things all just seem like
Well,
no brainers, you know?
yeah, I mean, I don't know your like politics personally, but like I think that most
Mhm.
people they think of right wing, and when they hear the word right wing, they think, oh, like neo-Nazi skinhead racist or something to that effect.
Okay.
But if you actually kind of look at what it really means, it's basically just about kind of individualism or like personal autonomy versus collectivism, or kind of like a like big government and that kind of stuff. I know what I was going to say actually, by the way, when I lost my train of thought, is that one of the other words which I've heard used to talk about libertarianism, which is very rarely used, but I think that it gives a very good idea to someone new to it about what it actually means, is consensualism. And the whole concept is that everything that you do in life basically should be consented to. And, when I think about consensualism and I think about veganism, I'm like, well, that's very similar. You're like, an animal cannot consent to their own death. It cannot consent to their own enslavement. I think consensualism is really important. And a lot of people who kind of are on the left or whatever, and they look at libertarianism and they say, oh, it's bad because, they don't care about poor people, or they don't care about this or that. We should be, the concepts of libertarianism basically is saying like everything should be consented to, just because, even if someone is in need of something, right? Like if someone on the street is poor and they need money, right? Should you be forced to give them money? I would say no, because that's it's an infringement on your personal sovereignty. I think that you should, and you might be a moral person for doing that, for giving money to a poor person or any charitable act. But essentially, all human action should be consented to by that party. And if that person, if we agree that people have property rights at all, which, I think everyone, most people obviously agree that that property rights exist to some degree, then they should be protected, and that you should have the right to kind of determine the use of your own property, whether you give it away to someone, what you do with it, including the property, of your own body, especially, and so yeah, I think that the two ideas are very, very similar, and I think that libertarianism slash voluntarism slash consensualism, those kind of concepts are so similar to what we're doing with veganism. It's just that we're doing it in a human context versus an animal context. So not many people blur the lines, and maybe I'm incorrect in doing it, and maybe someone will come up and be like, hey, look, this is a bad way to look at it. You shouldn't try to apply these things to the human world. It's an independent philosophy. I'm not a fan of like intersectionalism. So I don't think what I'm doing is intersectionalism. What I'm doing is trying to have an umbrella philosophy which actually fits both the human and animal world, which is consistent.
I get you. So in the sense, when you were talking about the donating to homeless people, for example, and it being a forced thing, so I guess libertarians are against taxes. Then would I be right in assuming like forced taxation?
I mean, pure libertarianism would be against any taxation. Basically, you deny that there is legitimacy in essentially like government and stuff. Like, let's say you have 10. Let's say you have like 10 people in a room, right? Because 6 of them vote to take the money of the other 4. That doesn't, you could say, okay, well, that's democracy. Okay, it might be democracy for 6 people to vote and take the money of the other 4 people, but it's breaching a fundamental principle of property rights. Okay, so like in the same way, like, maybe this analogy is going to fall short. I haven't thought it through before I'm about to say it, but like, let's take let's take the animal world, for example. Because most people aren't vegan, does that mean that that veganism is morally wrong, right? Because most people aren't, like 99% of people aren't vegan. That doesn't mean that veganism is morally wrong, right? We're trying to argue from a fundamental first principles basis that animals should be afforded these rights, animal rights, essentially. Now, libertarianism is basically saying, yeah, you might be able to get a bunch of people together to vote in a government who's going to go and take the money of the rich people, or maybe it's not so rich, maybe it's the middle class, whatever. That doesn't mean that it's a legitimate institution, because because most people can try to push something through, if it's breaching their fundamental, property rights, then it's still wrong, right? So that's really where libertarianism sits for me.
And then when you apply it to animals, you could use the example of, okay, if most people vote for bigger farms that do more, like that kill more animals because most people want it, you would say from a libertarian standing point, it doesn't matter if most people vote for that. What matters is that these individual animals have the rights that because you apply libertarianism to them, they have the rights to not have that happen to them. So it doesn't matter if you want it to, they have the rights to not have it happen. That's where you're coming from. That's really interesting.
And this is where kind of, people hear the word like individualism, right? And they think, oh, well, that's just someone being selfish. That's just someone kind of, I want all my stuff and I don't want anyone having any of it. And actually that it's not, all of our rights, they ultimately kind of stem from individualism, right? Everyone is afforded individual rights, and all of the collective rights, they only happen as a result of individual rights. So essentially, like, if we protect individual rights, and obviously we have some protections which are, we all agree to, right? Like normally, obviously, I don't know what your opinions are, but in the last 2 years, this has been violated a bit. But the right to bodily autonomy, right? The right to say, I'm in my own skin and I don't have to have anything, put in me or take from me. Nobody can vote to say I'm gonna have to donate my blood, for example, right?
Yeah.
We accept that's a fundamental thing which cannot be violated. Now, libertarianism basically takes that to your extended property and basically says, if you've got money, that as long as you've not stolen that money, as long as it's been earned through legitimate work, legitimate means, you've sold a product or service that people wanted to buy voluntarily, there's been absolutely no coercion, and you've earned that money, then nobody has the right to suddenly come and claim it from you. Nobody has the right to vote and say, I'm going to vote to take that person's money. There's no, democracy should not supersede those individual rights. And that's kind of what, that's kind of the fundamentals of libertarianism. It's stemming from individual rights, essentially, and it's just extrapolating that out and saying society should not violate these. And then when you do extrapolate that out, what you end up with is saying, well, things like government are largely invalid, essentially. They're not legitimate kind of institutions. Just because people have got together and voted, if they're voting to betray individual rights, then it's still immoral.
Does this system, it feels like, this is my first reaction to it, that this system kind of is relying on people being good-natured, and because if there is no, I don't know if you could use the word coercion, will people still be good? Like, will they still help the poor? Will they still, you know what I mean? Like, if there's no kind of...
Ultimately, we don't know. But, I'd say there's two things with that. One is that, like, if people have to be coerced in the first place to do something that they don't want to do, how do you know that it's more moral to coerce them than it is to not coerce them and essentially have, maybe there is more people who aren't donating or whatever. I mean, it's like pick your morality, right? Like, is it more moral to have coercion as a fundamental basis of how we operate our society, or do we not have the coercion, but we accept that society might not be quite as equal, etc.? And then the other thing I would say is we don't actually know how altruistic people will be, because at the moment, most people, because they pay so much in taxes and all this kind of stuff, they just say, okay, well, it's the government's job. If people are poor, it's the government's job to fix it. It's the government's job to make sure that kids get a good education. It's the government's job to provide healthcare, etc. Well, if we had a voluntary society, there might be a kind of social change such that people would say, oh, well, like there is a social pressure for people to actually do things. If you've got a lot of money, there's a social pressure for you to actually do things. And I do think that times gone by when government wasn't so big, it was generally assumed, you had like companies and stuff that would have these big schemes that they would do. You'd have a big company that's very successful and they would do things for employees. They'd do things for the community. Now that's all kind of just been sucked into the responsibility of government. So we don't actually know, we don't actually have kind of self-responsibility for, enacting upon our own morality. We might have a more moral society. We don't know, because, maybe without government, we would feel the need to do that.
I get what you mean. So you're kind of saying that the current way things are set up, like the communities, the society we're in, is not encouraged to be that way. Instead, it's like handed over to Big Daddy, Big Brother to tell us what to do, when to do it, as opposed to us coming together and actually trying to look after our own communities. That's basically what I feel like you're saying.
Basically that is disincentivized. And not only that, but I think people are skeptical because we have so many degrees of separation between, for instance, paying taxes and actually that money doing anything, is that when you pay your taxes, you have no idea where it's gone. It might have, it feels like it's going into a black hole. You can't see the tangible effect on that. Right. Yeah. Which,
if you're in the USA, that's definitely where it's gone.
Right. You have no idea. So it becomes what actually happens is not only do you feel less incentivized to go out and help someone else because you're like, well, I'm giving all this money to government to do stuff. But you actually think that money might be kind of going counter to what you actually want to happen in the world. And then you will say, oh, well, you know what? I'm going to try and pay less taxes. Everybody is in the business. I've met people who are as far less left as they come. Everyone is in the business of reducing your taxes as much as possible. Everyone will find any expense. They'll be like, oh yeah, like I bought this really, this new pair of headphones or whatever. I'm going to put that as a business expense. Everyone does it. No, there's no one who will be like, oh yeah, actually I'm only using these headphones for the workplace. So therefore, I'm only using them for leisure. So therefore I won't, do it as an expense. Everyone is fudging their taxes and stuff to try and pay as minimum possible. And I think largely that's because we have these degrees of separation between what we're paying and what we actually kind of like, what we experience. Whereas if you didn't pay so much in taxes, but you walk out and you say, you know what, I can put money in someone's hand, I can fund maybe I'm a company and I can fund an institution, whatever, locally that's actually doing real work. I think that if people weren't giving all this money to government and seeing it sink into a black hole, maybe they would have more incentive to do that. We would change culture and society through that.
I think you're onto something there, and especially as vegans, we really don't want to pay taxes because we see exactly where it goes. It goes into the animal ag, right? I mean, again, I know it seems like USA centered right now, but I mean, it's the USA that's making the biggest moves with this kind of stuff. Just pumping $1 billion into the meat industry. Biden just signed that off recently. So if you're in the USA paying taxes, that could be where your money goes. And if you're in any country, basically across, I don't know if it happens in the East and other countries, but in the West, yeah, pretty much every country is pumping money into, every government's pumping money into animal ag to keep it running, because it won't run without the subsidies. So yeah, totally, there's a very big incentive for people to not pay taxes. And I feel like it checks out what you're saying, that if there weren't taxes, maybe more people would be more charitable, right? And putting their money where they actually want it to go to help, as opposed to the government taking it, putting it in the fucking meat industry, for example.
Yeah, but just to extend that point, because let's take the other end of that scenario, and let's say that people are going to be more poor and they're going to be less equal, right? If you didn't take their money. Well, I would use this example, and I use this one often as a way to kind of like demonstrate like how that immorality, still exists, right? Let's say, going back to the giving blood example, I think I mentioned it before. Let's say that the government could have a scheme where they go around and they forcefully take the blood of every single person in the entire country, and then they say, okay, we're going to put it all in a blood bank, and we know categorically this is going to save 10,000 lives a year, right? Because we're going to get all this blood from these people. Some of them have rare blood groups, whatever, right? Now, you could argue, well, that's a moral thing to do. It's going to save 10,000 lives, and you're not going to kill 10,000 people in the process. So it's, so that kind of goes into this idea that like, there's a word for it where it's like a net positive.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, but
I'd say, oh right, okay, I get it. Yeah, it's
but right, but most people would still agree that that's a borrowing, because you still accept, no, my blood is part of my body, and you should have, even if 10,000 people are going to die more per year, we shouldn't violate people's bodily autonomy. We shouldn't go around sticking needles in people and saying you've got to give your blood. Now, I would say all we're doing with kind of like the libertarian philosophy is just extending that to your property. You're saying that, it's not only my body, my physical body, which should be kind of like protected, and I should have fundamental rights over it. It's also the money that I've earned, like through consensual, contractual, trade, etc. And it's the things that I own, etc., that I've bought with my money, that should also be protected under the same kind of rule, which is that nobody can just take it from you without you voluntarily kind of agreeing to do so.
Okay. So I think, I mean, from what you're saying to me, a lot of this makes a lot of sense. Again, on the surface, this is like very surface level stuff, and it all makes sense. I'm sure there's a lot of people who are going to be in the comments with all the things that I should have said to you at this point, and you should have asked this.
The hilarious thing is, I went on Lauren's channel, jumping in the lion's den, talking about veganism, and now I'm going on your channel where I'm sure there's going to be a lot of like lefties and stuff. So I'm jumping in another lion's den. That's what I'm doing.
To me, right? Like I hear what you're saying, and these don't seem like, I don't feel like a lot of what you're saying is counter to people that I've met who would consider themselves left. So maybe they're just not left enough to get into where they would argue with this. Maybe they are actually right and they think they're left. I don't really know, because for me, when I'm talking about left and right, I'm usually talking about the extremities of both. I'm never really,
right.
Most people fall, like, imagine there's like you're crazy left here, you're crazy right here. Most people are like here. Right, they're like almost the same, and they just swing one way or the other, like by a fraction, and then they somehow think the other one's evil for some reason.
Yeah,
that's where I think most people sit. So I actually think most people listening that are not on those extremes are going to be like, yeah, this is fucking reasonable. Like this is compatible with all the things I believe. Maybe there's the odd thing that you've said where they're like, yeah, that's not compatible, but everything else is. Because most people are reasonable. This is the thing we need to keep remembering. Most people are not idiots, like looking for someone to attack, like, because they call themselves right wing or whatever. But let's actually talk about that, because so libertarianism, again, I've not really researched it. I don't know much about it. So is it like just a given that libertarianism is right wing, or are there people that fall on the other side that would still consider themselves to hold those values?
Yeah, I mean, there are some people who it's a bit of debate like as to whether you can have a left libertarian, and there is something called left
Right.
libertarianism where people kind of, they essentially believe a lot of the ideas of the left, but they still believe in kind of like decentralization, all these kind of things. Personally, I
Right.
don't see it. I used to think that was the category I fell into. And now I just don't really think it is. I think the left right divide on this is basically, do you believe in fundamental like first principles of individual autonomy and
Hmm.
individual kind of rights, like at the individual level, basically? Or
Right.
do you believe in kind of collectivism in which the collective can override, or, by voting and by kind of democratic means, etc., you can
Okay.
override fundamental individual rights? Now, I'm definitely on the former of that, and other people would be on the latter. And I think that that's the divide. So I would say that libertarianism and right wing, they are kind of synonymous with each other, basically.
Right. Okay.
I know that, but a lot of people get triggered by the idea of right wing, and I used to be pretty far left as well, and I used to as well. Anyone who say they were right wing, I was like, oh wait, you're basically admitting you're a racist bigot or whatever, and you're anti-immigration stuff. None of that, like I have pretty kind of like relaxed views on things like immigration stuff, because again, for me, it all just comes down to what's the rights of the individual. Even nation states, I don't really kind of give them too much credibility as an institution. Probably more so than government. You could have
Mm.
like private nations essentially, or private territories which are operated. So they have more legitimacy for me. But yeah, like the idea that right wing is synonymous with, like anti-immigration, like, or being, somehow
Yeah, like
racist.
pro
Like there's
racism,
no,
pro like
yeah,
sexism, patriarchy, wants to
exactly,
give tax
exactly,
cuts to billionaires, and wants to like
exactly,
make keep the poor poor, keep the rich rich. These are all the things
right,
I hear when people say like this is why right wing is bad. This is what they're
yeah,
saying. But you don't. They, yeah. What of? But it's I'm not going to sit here and be like, "Oh, you're a racist," because I think we all established that it's very very highly likely that you're not, and it's it's
no, you
I
mean
don't
that?
see.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like I don't see what the need to have that conversation is with someone. I mean, it's a strange that people expect, like some people expect me to ask you that question because you say you're right wing, which I just think is complete insanity.
Yeah,
To
yeah, yeah.
just
It
presume that
is. It
someone,
is crazy. I
you
mean,
know,
yeah, there's no association there whatsoever. Like
right.
people who are. I don't quite understand where that whole idea has come from anyway, because I think that racism is not even on the same scale. There's no.
Mm.
It's not like racism appears somewhere on the left right scale,
Right.
because if anything, if I was to really dive into whether it does, I would say, well, surely if you're more as you go more left wing and you believe in big government,
Mm.
that's when you're able to have, only then are you able to have really strong like immigration laws and stuff. If you're for small government, you're generally going to have probably more likely to have lenient immigration laws, and you're allowed the free
Right.
movement of people more. So I'm not
Interesting.
sure. I'm not sure where it appears. I'm sure there's, obviously there is this association between like being right wing and having some kind of racist views, but
Mhm.
I've not actually like met anyone who's like on the right who I would say,
Mm.
okay, this person actually is racist. I mean, maybe it's just the circles I'm in, but I think that people, this idea that you're some kind of like, neo-Nazi if you're like
Mm.
far right. I mean, I guess far right's the term that's used, right? Like I never use that
Right.
term for myself, because that one, even though I guess you could on one hand say, well, far right just means that you believe in minimum government, which I do.
Mm.
But at the same time, like it's got this association of all of these like other like really awful things like racism stuff. So I just stay away from that term
Mm.
because it's been tarnished. But essentially, I just what I believe in is consensualism. It's the best word for it, really,
Okay.
and also just like fundamental individual rights.
So, like right wing, the main critiques you'll hear from vegans who are actually being sensible with this, actually not just going straight for the racism and stuff. Like what the most sensible points I've
Yeah.
heard would be like things like, but right wingers are all about tradition, culture, and maintaining the status quo and keeping things as they are, which usually
Right.
means they want to keep animals where they are too, and also on top of that, usually heavy religion, which again keeps animals exactly where they are, and humans elevated and animals lower, because that's what I know there are some Christians out there, and there's some, and there are Hindus, and there are lots of different religions, Muslims who try to say, that, yeah, veganism is compatible with those religions, and it is compatible. But let's be honest, the teachings of those religions all teach that humans are higher and animals are lower, and that's not debatable. That is what they teach. So,
Mhm.
a lot of vegans that's what they would say. In this case, that's the problem they have with right wingers, on a kind of more of a social, personal level. What do you think about
Right.
that?
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing. So I think that those people that you described, I would describe those as, yeah, I guess it's conservatism, right? Like,
Right.
I think that there is a kind of fundamental difference there between libertarianism and conservatism. And people who describe themselves as conservatives, generally, they're actually, they're things like they're very pro like military. They're like, we need a strong military. Like, I'm just like, I'm not about that at all.
Right.
I would like individuals to have the ability to protect themselves. I would like individuals to have the ability to protect themselves against, whatever it is, either an invading force or a tyrannical government, etc. But like, I'm not for like big, large scale governmental, military. That would be a
Right.
kind of more of a conservative view. Like you said, also things like a lot of conservatives, they would be against things like gay marriage and stuff. I
Mhm.
don't agree with that at all. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the government should have absolutely no business in marriage at all. And if they do, then
Okay.
everything should be fair game. I don't see any reason to separate those two. So, yeah, I think there's a difference between conservative right wingers and libertarian right wingers, in that
Okay.
libertarians
Right.
tends to be more about a fundamental philosophy of individual rights. Conservatism tends to be more about like, no, we need to keep society as it was. We're going to resist change, even if that change is kind of, rational, or in my view, it's not this just rational. It's more like in accordance with like a general, we should be consistent in our application of our philosophy. And I'm not sure that
Right.
conservatism is, and I do think that
Yeah.
libertarianism generally is.
Totally, yeah, you're onto something there. I think, when you're in a house that's air conditioned with Wi-Fi and you're trying to argue for conservative living, it's kind of like, well, listen, mate, you've updated everything else in your house. Why don't you update your fridge too? It's not, it's not. You can't just pick and choose what you benefit from, mate. Have a
Yeah.
look at around you. All right. Just going back to something you said earlier, you said racism is not a right wing thing. And actually, there's something popped in my head. We just hosted a debate between a vegan of 50 years, actually, vegan activist, founder of the ALF, the Animal Liberation Front, Ronnie Lee, and a vegan activist, George Martin. They had a debate about whether right wingers can be vegan or not. And one of George's points, the guy who was saying, yes, they can be vegan, he said that animal abuse is not a left or a right thing.
Yeah.
You wouldn't say that racism or sexism or child abuse is something that is political. Like, oh, if you're left wing, then that's part of left wing, or child abuse. Or if you're right wing, part of right wing is racism. It's not. These are
Right.
things that people are because they are or aren't a scumbag. Their politics has got nothing really to do with that. I mean, I guess the people you hang out with can influence that, but the point is they are not. They may occur more in certain groups, but they are not part of that ideology, if that makes sense. Like, and he was trying to argue like that's why veganism can also not be like a left or like anti-racism is not a left or right thing. It's somebody is racist or not, and then the politics is
Yeah.
that the whatever, how they vote or the other things they believe are kind of alongside that, let's say. So that was an interesting point. Would you do you agree
Yeah.
with that, would you say?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it really frustrates me, this idea that people think like that, that veganism is not only a left wing thing, which, yeah, it does have that. It is generally like left wing people tend to be more vegan, probably for
Yeah.
more reasons of like, I guess, character, like maybe people's character, maybe they generally would be more compassionate people, whatever, that's
Yeah.
great. Like,
It's all
I like to
bleeding
think I'm a
heart thing,
compassionate.
isn't it? Right.
Yeah,
That's
I
how
like to think
people
I'm a
end up.
compassionate person as well, but I also try to think at things from kind of like a bit more of a zoomed out level and say, okay, like part of being compassionate is also not taking people's stuff when they don't consent to it, etc. Right? So
Sure.
like, I think that there's no association there, and I mentioned in my debate with Lauren about this debate that I had with another vegan. The guy I was talking about, by the way, is Gary Francione, and I'm sure you'll know of him.
Oh, I've had a run-in
Now,
with him as well before. Yeah.
oh, have you? That's
Yeah.
interesting because, yeah, basically, like, he was actually one of the people who got me to go vegan. It was listening to some of his talks. He really helped push me over. I was on my journey, and he really pushed me over the edge of actually kind of like taking the dive and properly going vegan. I just
Awesome.
thought that he was really good in debates and stuff. But I just think that this guy has, at some point, I don't know whether it was always, and I just missed it, but he's completely lost the plot. And part of what he's doing, in his kind of weird little Facebook cult, is he's saying things like, if someone is wearing a MAGA hat at a vegan protest, then get rid of them. They shouldn't be there. Like, he says stuff like basically that if you're right wing, and that you can't be part of the vegan movement, and he's explicitly said, like, human rights are inseparable from animal rights, and these right wing people, like, they don't care about human, and it's like he's delusional. And I also had a run in with him about the pro-life thing, which is something that I'm happy to get into if you want. But like, I just think that this guy is just incredibly divisive, and not only is he doing damage to the vegan cause, but he's also, he's basically saying, like, not only are we going to try and make the world go vegan, which is an unbelievably arduous task on its own. He's like, no, I'm going to get the whole world to become a far leftist and a vegan. So you've just multiplied your efforts like about 1,000,000x, because now you've got these two impossible tasks that both need to happen simultaneously, because anyone who's not left wing is not invited, right? It's just crazy. And I don't know. I hope that this guy becomes irrelevant soon. And I think he's becoming increasingly irrelevant, but I hope he does, because honestly, like, this guy's just been terrible for the vegan community.
See, I don't know how far you were able to get with him, or how that went, but Ronnie Lee, who came on, also kind of had very similar. It was nowhere near as brutal as that. Like, he was more reasonable, but his arguments were kind of, almost along that line of, but he was coming at it from more an economical perspective. Like, he was saying that right-wing economics cannot ever align with a vegan world. This was his argument, because it's all about growth and consumerism, and that destroys the planet, and destroying the planet kills animals, and therefore it's not a vegan activity to do that, to keep on trying to get bigger and bigger and bigger and take more and more and more. So he was saying
there's a really simple response to that. Like, the obvious answer is that the reason that we do have this consumerist economy where everyone has to keep consuming so much is because you have these central banks that are just continuously printing money to fund government activity. And as they do that, it inflates the currency, so that you can't hold your value in the currency. You have to basically go out and either buy stocks or shares, or you've got to keep selling stuff. You've got to keep using raw materials from the earth, etc. Like, his argument's completely backwards. Like, the reason that consumerism exists is because of big government. If we didn't have that, if we didn't have governments inflating and manipulating currency through central banks, then you wouldn't have that incentive structure in the first place. And I actually think that, the other thing, you already mentioned it, like how much governments are actually subsidizing not just the animal agriculture industry, but they're also subsidizing the plant agriculture industry, which is basically being used to a factor of 10 on feeding animals. So imagine if you got rid of those subsidies, you would actually have the real price realization on food, which people would actually say, oh, maybe my McDonald's burger shouldn't be costing 99 cents. Actually, it should cost $10, because all of this subsidies has been going into the agriculture industry. So like, government has created so many of these problems, and to argue that, like, government's going to fix them, is totally wrong. If we want economic rationality, and I think that veganism is in line with economic rationality, if you go to countries that don't have these subsidies, you go and order like you go to Thailand or something, and you order a tofu noodle soup or whatever it is, or Vietnam, I'm getting mixed up on countries. Get that versus the meat one, it's going to be like twice the price, or it's going to be significantly more, because they don't have the same subsidies, so they charge more for the meat generally. Whereas in the West, it doesn't seem to work that way. We don't have that same economic rationality, because we have all of these government, these government institutions basically that are saying, like, oh, we're gonna subsidize this and that and the other thing. I just think that, like, if you actually got rid of that, you would end up paying a lot more for animal products, and you'd have a true realization in price. And I'm not saying that that's the answer, that like the answer to the vegan problem is not philosophical, it's economical, of course not. But I do think that governments are contributing to the problem of people eating all this meat through their incentives, through the way that they're funding these things.
I think you're making a bit too much sense, and YouTube is probably going to limit this video. there's too much like rebellion in this, in everything you just said there. People are going to get angry and go and try and take down the central banks now, mate. YouTube's going to be like, nah, we can't have that. We can't have that. Yeah, but no, that's a good point. That didn't come up actually. What George actually responded at this point was to say that he actually believes the free market is creating competition for vegan products, and without it, if we just trust the government, he's with you on that. He disagrees with trusting the government to make these changes and make these decisions. He thinks that in our current state of affairs, like as we are as a, with all the governments of the world and how the system runs capitalism, the best shot we've got is to have vegan companies competing, not to try to like switch the entire economical system, right? So George was kind of arguing like working with the system we have for now, I suppose, because it's what we have, and trying to upheave that and change it, like you said earlier, is just one more thing to add to the pile of things we need to convince people of.
Yeah.
So, not only do you need to be vegan, you need to be anti-consumerist. In Ronnie's view, you have to be anti-consumerist. We have to completely just undo all of these systems all at the same time, and you have to be pro all of that and be behind all of that. Or you can be vegan and try and work with the system we have, which is significantly easier. In Ronnie's view, though, that wouldn't be the best option, I suppose. And in your view, you want to change the system too, to be fair. So you're probably somewhere in between George and Ronnie on this, actually, I'd say, somewhere down the
Yeah,
middle,
I mean,
right?
yeah, for sure. But I think that like the direction of momentum, in my view, should be towards like an increase in kind of individual rights. Like that's for
Yeah.
both, obviously, like veganism as we afford to animals, and for humans. I think in both directions we should be trending towards that. So I do want to kind of change things, but I also, I think you're right. I think that part of the problem is that some vegans, they're so caught up in so many different social justice issues because we care about a lot of stuff. That's why we're vegan, right? But then
Mm-hmm.
they say, oh, like all this needs to change. We need to revolutionize this, that, and the other thing. But it's like I prefer the message of just saying to people, like, you can be vegan right now. Like, there's nothing stopping you
Yeah.
being vegan. Like, you don't need anything more or less than that's there. You just go out, and when people start talking about the money thing, it's like, it's just, you're going to spend less money buying vegan food. You can do it anywhere, like basically anywhere in the world. There's very few locations you can't be vegan. And like, I think that's the answer, not to start getting into this whole thing about, no, we need to change all these structures and upheave the whole of capitalism. It's like, first of all, it's not going to happen because there's a lot of people who are against it. So it's just, it's someone like me, I genuinely think I can convince anyone to go vegan, but can I convince anyone to go go right wing, or when I was a lefty to go left wing? Maybe, but like, I just think that like we don't need to do that. Like, anyone can be vegan right now. We can just keep it to that and just say, like, let's just talk about that issue. Obviously, like when I do talk to people
Right.
on the right, I try to draw on that philosophy because I think that for people who believe in stuff like the non-aggression principle, it's a bit easier to get them there. But I will never say like, oh, we need to change the world for everyone to be vegan. No, like everyone can be vegan right now.
Yeah, it's compatible. That's the point, isn't it? That it's compatible with pretty much everyone's way of living, no matter if you're like some hardcore, super Muslim with all the values that come along
Mhm.
with that, or if you're a super progressive atheist, or if you're, it's anyone can be vegan, and even with all those
Mhm.
cultural and traditional things that come along with being a religious or whatever person, that it's compatible. That's the point. You don't need to go ex-Muslim to go vegan, for example. You don't need to believe in
Yeah.
Christianity, Christian God, to go atheist to Christian to go. You don't need to change anything else about your life apart from what you pick up at the supermarket, right? That's a
Yeah.
really, I think, I agree with you. We keep it. The pill needs to be very, very small to swallow, and you start adding all these
Mhm.
caveats and stuff. Then I start to get frustrated.
Yes.
And I guess,
That's
you've been
exactly it. Yeah.
taking. Go ahead. I was going to say, I bet you've faced some of this. I'm going to assume, like with the vegan community. Are you vocally, like, do you come out as right wing? It sounds weird to put it that way, but I imagine it's something you do think about, right? Like when talking to a vegan, like, oh shit, should I mention it? Because they can be pretty hostile with this,
Yeah.
right? The vegan community.
Yeah, I mean, like, to be honest, I haven't, I know you've tuned in a bit to my podcast. I'm not sure how many episodes you listen to, but like, I've not done any on veganism like so far. Like, occasionally it crops up. I will tell people on the right that I'm vegan. I will tell like vegans that I'm kind of like on the right. I
Mm,
never kind of like try to kind of like hide my views, because as far as I'm concerned, like if you have conviction in your beliefs and you believe that you're acting, upon like the highest level of kind of like morality that you can, then I don't
mm,
think you should be afraid to say it to either group. So yes, like I to be honest, I haven't had too many conversations like this I'm having with you. So, it's nice to actually kind of like have my first foray into the vegan community. I'd be interested to see like what people think and what people think about my ideas. But I did have a few people from the video I did with Lauren who came, and they
mhm,
were subs of hers who privately came to me and said, oh, by the way, I'm vegan. Thanks for doing this video. I also kind of agree that there's this kind of like commonality between libertarianism and veganism, etc. So there's people
cool.
out there. But yeah, it's more that actually I probably get it the other way more, like people in that kind of like right wing community who are like, oh, veganism, it's all about, it's all about transhumanism, and like we should go back to our nature and stuff. And that's
Okay.
why I tried to make that point as well. Going back to Lauren's video, I did try to make I brought that up specifically, the whole transhumanism thing, and she obviously said it as well with like, oh, isn't it like being trans and stuff, which you did a really great job of kind of addressing that point in your video. But this is the mentality of a lot of people who are kind of on the right, who are kind of more conservative, less so libertarians, but they believe that, veganism, it's like a diversion from our nature. It's this new thing that like we should be afraid of because we should be looking back. And
Right.
so I get more friction there than I do from the vegan community. But then again, I haven't spent that much time in the vegan community having these conversations, so maybe I'll find out.
Yeah, fair play. It's back to what we said earlier, isn't it? About that people they're scared of this is a new thing, but again, they're not scared of Wi-Fi or air conditioning or I don't know. It's a very
Yeah.
weird concept, isn't it? Like that's it.
Well, I guess there's
Just
something about, there is something about putting something in your body that I do think, is kind of different to that, right?
sure,
Like
sure.
you are, if you are changing what you eat and stuff. So I think that
Mm,
I can understand people's hesitancy with that kind of thing, but obviously
yeah,
once you do it, and this is again another thing I said in Lauren's video, it's like when I went vegan, like basically nothing changed. You hear all
right,
these
right.
stories of people being like, oh, I went vegan and then like I had no energy and I had this and like I lost my sex drive and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, for me, literally nothing changed. I mean, it wasn't
Yeah,
like
it could be the opposite
I
too,
didn't feel
right?
like I got, yeah,
So
I
I mean,
didn't feel
some
like I
people say the
got
opposite
like,
too, like, oh, I got more energy, I got more sex. You know what I mean? Some people give that,
yes,
so it's
yes, yeah. Some
yeah,
people, yes,
yeah.
sorry, yeah. So some people say that as well, but for me, like basically nothing, like really not a lot changed. It was pretty much just everything changed except for just like what I was putting in my body. It took a little bit of time to adapt and learn to learn what to cook and stuff, but
Hmm.
just nothing really changed, right? So like
Sure.
when people really try it and try it honestly, I think that most people will find, and if they actually committed and they do a bit of research into what they eat, then
Yeah,
they're going to be fine. So I always try and make that
of
point that it's
course.
like I understand the hesitancy about like, are we
Mhm.
doing something different that our bodies aren't designed to do? But then most people, when they try it, like they're going to realize that it's perfectly fine.
Yeah, and you again, I know the comparison to AC baby wasn't valid, but I mean there are lots of foods around these days that I'm sure these conservatives, these right wingers are eating, like processed stuff, sodas, sugary drinks, things that have been produced that they don't even know how they've been produced, that couldn't have been produced, and how yeah, like some years ago, and how far back do they go with this stuff? Like how far back is back enough for to make something conservative or progressive in terms of food,
Yeah.
right? Are we talking like ancient humans? Is that how far back they're looking? Some of them are, right? But of course they don't live their entire lives eating what primitive humans ate. So clearly they're progressive enough to consider new foods in some elements. What it probably is, this in my opinion, this idea of like them being scared about a new thing or whatever and trying to make it out to be like something about conservative values, it's most likely just they just don't want to stop eating what they're eating, and that this is an
Mhm.
excuse, right? Holding it as part of their conservative values is a great excuse to try to dismiss it and be like, yeah, it's not part of, or trying to make it political is a great excuse to not change. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think so. And I also think that just the main reason for people's resistance isn't necessarily because it's difficult to go to the shops and buy something different, or you're going to have to order something vegan on the menu. I really think that for the vast majority of people, it's purely like cultural. It's like, I don't want to be
Right.
in that group. I'm in this group and I have this identity. And I don't know about you, but well, actually, you've been kind of like a lifelong vegetarian, so maybe you didn't kind of go through this. But when I first went vegan, it was like my friends were kind of like, not all of them, but some of them, they were kind of like bitter about it. It was like, oh, you're
Yeah.
changing. Why are you changing? And as soon as they hear you've gone vegan, it's like, oh, you're
Right.
like a vegan now. You're all different. We don't quite understand you anymore. And I think that for most people, it's that. So when you bring
Mm.
them the arguments and you say, look, like this is the vegan philosophy and this is what it's about, their resistance to it isn't because they don't understand the argument. The resistance to it is, if I choose to understand this, if I choose to really digest this and accept it as my truth, I've now got across this bridge of becoming vegan and
Mhm.
having that entire, ripping myself out of all of these social kind of paradigms I'm normally in, right? Like now when
Yeah.
I go for pizza with the guys, what am I going to do? Am I going to have to like get a vegan pizza? Am I going to have to like not go to those occasions? How am I going to have that conversation with friends and family? Whatever
Yeah.
it is. I think that that's ultimately the hurdle for most people. So that's why, again, I always just come back to like being an example of a vegan who has just done it, is healthy and is happy and fulfilled from it.
Mm.
That's
Mhm.
always the most important thing for me, because you can do arguments all day, but if people aren't ready to go through the personal change, they're just going to reject all the arguments, not because they're invalid, but just because they're not willing to accept them because they know they'll have to change their actions after that.
Yeah, that's fair. It's fair. The reaction you had from your mates is similar to when someone quits drinking, for example. Like, you're not going to be one of us anymore. You're not going to be,
Yeah.
you're not going to have the beers with us anymore. What are we going to do? How are we going to,
Yeah.
it makes them feel, especially because quitting drinking is a good thing, right? It's good for you. And so is quitting smoking. And so is going vegan. Like, it's a good thing. It's like a morally good thing. And people don't like it when you do something for you that's good that makes them feel shit. So there's this, yeah, it's that, you have to get past that. And then I agree with you. Then you've got to get to the point where you show them like, hey, look, I'm still the same person. Everything's the same, and you can be too. Totally agree. And regarding the I don't know. I don't know why you mentioned the man bun. I think just then, or maybe you didn't. But like, what came first, the veganism or the man bun? I wanted to ask that at the beginning actually, but I forgot.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I think the man bun was. I think I might have been growing the man, like maybe the man bun was after. Honestly, I don't know. It was very similar time. They would have been within months of each other, so the transition happened together. Yeah,
because I mentioned
you used to have one, right?
I used to have one. I did, and it looked pretty good. But yeah, how old are you, by the way?
31.
31, right? So you're reaching the time where you're probably gonna have to maybe look into it. I hope you don't, mate. But I got to like 30, 31, and I started to see the receding hairline, and I was like, oh fuck, I can't keep this man bun up anymore. I see that every day. So I hope you don't get that, mate. I hope you get to keep a good strong man bun for another like 20 years. But just keep an eye out for it.
Yeah. Wait, but do you think the receding was due to the man bun? Do you think that it caused?
No. Totally not.
It was just.
Yeah, it was just that I'm getting to that age where it's not even drastic, man. My hair's still fine, but it's just, seeing it pulled back every day and seeing it slowly start to change, it just depressed the fuck out of me.
No,
so
I've been thinking about taking it off, mainly because when I put like my motorbike helmet on, like it's annoying. So like that might be the thing that pushes me over the edge.
Fair enough. Yeah. Well, no, what a really important, and we needed to get that topic to be the final one, because that's the one everyone was waiting for. That's the clickbait. Yeah. That's what the video will be, the clickbait. Why? What came first, the man bun or veganism? That's what's going to get everyone to watch till the end, right?
Yeah, of course.
It's been awesome to have you here, mate. And I've learned a lot today about libertarianism. And maybe there are going to be a lot of lefties in the comments now being like, David, no, don't go there. These people are evil. I'm excited to see what you guys think about all of this that's been said today, because I can't really see anything that's unreasonable. Maybe I'm naive. Maybe there's something I'm missing. Maybe Johnny's trying to like trick me into becoming a dirty right winger here or something. I don't know. You guys are gonna.
This is great. This is where it all begins. Well, what is your like? I know that your channel's like all about veganism and stuff. Do you ever discuss politics? And if so, like, what is your kind of like current like view about that? Would you call yourself a lefty, or are you relatively agnostic?
I feel like I fall like center left. If I was to take a test, which I've taken tests, that's what people would say to me. But like, I don't go out into the world with this in my head. I just look at topics and I'm like, I have my opinion. And then sometimes I've had opinions on things where people have been like, you sound like a fucking right winger. And then I've had another opinion where someone will go like, you're so woke. You're a little woke pussy. So it really, I go from like, some things people would tell me like, I've got an extremely left view on, extremely progressive. And then in the same sentence, like maybe 2 sentences later, they would say, wow, you sound like Jordan Peterson. So I really, honestly, man, I couldn't tell you at this point. Depends on who you ask.
There's something I was thinking about just before this conversation to try and like, obviously I spend a lot of time trying to get like people on the right to think about veganism, but just to go the other way, like, people who are vegan would say, for instance, I imagine, or I would hope that like animal use in like medicines and stuff is wrong, even if those medicines, might be like useful for humans, or for instance, animal testing is a good example, right? I can't remember the word for it, but
vivisection.
Vivisection. Like most vegans are against that, even if it has a positive outcome for humans. Even if you could take a monkey or whatever and do loads of experiments on it, and then humans would benefit from it. We accept as vegans it's fundamentally wrong to do that to an animal, even if it has an outcome for humans, because the kind of rights of the animal, like, they trump everything. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's going to save humans. Like, you can't inflict that on an animal. Now, I would say, like, obviously it's a different thing. I'm kind of like bridging a big gap here, but taking that similar philosophy to libertarianism, the whole premise is, if we should entitle people to the to their own property rights and the rights of their own body and etc. And everything should be kind of consensual, even if the outcome of that means that you might have more wealth disparity, etc. That actually, like, we don't justify something being a breaching of individual rights on the basis of its kind of greater good. And I think that vegans should understand that, because that's our whole philosophy, is that it doesn't matter how much good it does. It doesn't matter. Vivisection's wrong, even if it saves humans. And I think that if you start thinking in those terms and you think of it on a kind of more political scale, you start trending towards ideas of libertarianism. So I actually think that, you know, maybe that'll open the mind for some of your listeners as well to start looking into libertarianism. And there's loads of good areas for that. There's a website called Mises.org.
How are you
and
spelling that?
That one, MISES.
Okay.
And that, you know, that's kind of got loads of, you know, it's got really great kind of text. It's got articles, it's got kind of books, audio books, everything like that. And it's really good for kind of like starting to learn about the philosophy of like libertarianism and stuff like that. So I would definitely recommend that as a place for people to look as well.
Great, man. That was one of my questions, actually. So I'm glad you covered that, and I'll be checking that out. And people can find your incredibly problematic podcast as well, right? On Spotify, Apple Podcasts, the Staying Free podcast, right?
Yeah, the Staying Free podcast. I've also got a YouTube channel, which I'm currently trying to get it up to speed. But yeah, I'm putting on my episode backlog. But yeah, some of the stuff that we talk about on there, like, just, I know that YouTube's going to censor it, so at the moment I'm kind of going through 100%. And just making sure that I'm censoring areas which we're not allowed to talk about. But I'm bringing that up to speed, so if people want to listen to it there, that's great. Yeah, or they can go to my Twitter, which is Staying Free Pod, and there's a link there in the bio that'll take you to all of the different podcast channels, so you can all the podcast apps. You can check it out there. Yeah, and generally on that podcast, I'm talking about, you know, there's conversations about ethics. A lot of it's about kind of like self-sovereignty. Some of it's like politics, you know, geopolitics, macroeconomics. There's tons of different stuff in there, but it's normally kind of from a libertarian bent, and the idea that like the individual, like self-sovereignty, kind of versus these like big powers.
Yeah. So the two ones I listened to that you had were they were mostly surrounding the events of the last couple of years, specifically one massive event. And that's why I said incredibly problematic, because I'm sure a lot of people are going to have a very uncomfortable time listening to these things, because, you know how it's been over the past couple. But I think a lot of people actually right now, at least, I think a lot of people are starting to be more open-minded to what the hell's been going on over the past couple of years, and kind of listening to alternative viewpoints. When you released those podcasts, at least the one in December, I can imagine that wasn't the case.
I mean, when I first did it, you know, people thought I was crazy, but I really think that like over the time of doing my podcast, a lot of like the stuff that we were kind of talking about has been very much vindicated. You know, and so yeah, it was like, I think that now a lot more people have the skepticism, which I've had from very early on about things that have happened over the past like couple of years. So yeah, it's starting to get more palatable, but YouTube still doesn't like it. So I still have to do a bit of censoring on there.
Smart thing to do, mate. Cool. So that's where people can find you. Also on Twitter as @JonnyHodl, and anywhere else you're on Instagram, but you don't use it, right?
Yeah, at the moment, no. I do actually have Staying Free Pod is on there as well, but I don't. I haven't really done much with it yet, so I might build it up at some point. But for now, it's mainly.
You got a pretty big Twitter anyway, right? Yeah, you got you're pretty big on Twitter, so like, you might as well stick with what's working. Awesome, dude. Is there anything else you wanted to add that we didn't cover?
No, that's all. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. You know, if people haven't looked at your last video where you actually did a breakdown of the debate, like, props to you for doing that. I definitely think that people should watch that, because you echo kind of a lot of what I was thinking after it. So yeah, like, well done, and good luck with your channel, and hopefully we get to speak again at some point.